You just came home after a long day to find the car in your driveway gone, vanished, like it was never there. Now imagine finding out that your smug, power-drunk HOA Karen neighbor had it towed, just because she didn't like the way it looked. Now, imagine that car belonged to a high-ranking FBI agent. Yeah, you can already tell where this is going. This is the story of how Karen Victor, the most entitled HOA president to ever exist, made the worst mistake of her life when she decided to flex her fake authority on the wrong person. And trust me, you're gonna want to stick around for this one, because by the time this is over, well, let's just say Karen won't be running any neighborhood ever again. Think about it. If someone trusted you with something valuable and you found out it had been taken or tampered with, how would you feel? Would you even have the guts to face the person who entrusted you? Now, what if it wasn't even your fault? Wouldn't that make you furious? If that thought makes your blood boil, drop a comment below. It takes just a second for you, but it makes a huge difference for us. And while you're at it, smash that like button and subscribe for more jaw-dropping stories like this one. Now let's get into it. Sheldon Harris had always loved Maplewood Springs. For 5 years, it had been his sanctuary, a place where he could unwind and enjoy the peace and quiet that came with a non-HOA neighborhood. Then, Karen Victor arrived. At first, she seemed charming, sweet even. A middle-aged woman with a warm smile and an ever-present plate of fresh-baked cookies, she made it her mission to introduce herself to every single resident. She knocked on Sheldon's door the very day she moved in, holding a plate of chocolate chip cookies and complimenting his lawn. "Oh my, that's a beauty," she had said, eyes sparkling with admiration. "You must take such good care of it." Sheldon, caught off guard by her kindness, had smiled back. "Thanks, I put a lot of time into restoring it." Karen was friendly. She was helpful. She even started hosting neighborhood barbecues, always making sure everyone felt included. For 3 months, Sheldon believed he had just gotten the perfect new neighbor. But then, the HOA elections happened. No one even realized Karen was running until it was too late. She had slipped into every conversation, subtly planting seeds about how the neighborhood could be improved. She had charmed the older residents, sweet-talked the families, and before anyone knew it, she had won the HOA presidency by an unanimous vote. And that's when everything changed. The first letter arrived a week after she took office. Sheldon opened his mailbox one morning to find a crisp white envelope bearing the new HOA logo. Inside was a formal notice stating that his mailbox was non-compliant with community standards. Sheldon frowned. His mailbox had been there for years. A sturdy black metal box, it was practical, clean, and in perfect condition. So he ignored the letter. A week later, another letter arrived. This time it was marked, "Final Notice. Your mailbox does not adhere to the aesthetic guidelines of Maplewood Springs. Failure to comply within 7 days will result in a $200 fine." Sheldon was livid. Who was Karen to tell him what kind of mailbox he could have? He had never agreed to HOA rules. He marched across the street, letter in hand, and knocked on Karen's door. She answered with the same sugary smile she had worn the day she moved in. "Sheldon, what a surprise! How can I help?" He held up the letter. What is this?" Karen's smile didn't falter. "Oh, that's just standard enforcement. We want to keep the neighborhood looking uniform and beautiful, don't we?" Sheldon scoffed. "Karen, my mailbox looks fine." She let out a small laugh, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "I know change can be hard, dear, but rules are rules. Everyone must comply." He turned and walked away, clenching his fists. But the harassment didn't stop there. The next target? His lawn. Sheldon had always kept his yard tidy. Maybe it wasn't pristine, but it was healthy and well-maintained. But a few days after the mailbox incident, another letter arrived. "Your lawn height exceeds HOA standards. Please trim immediately or face a fine of $150. It was absurd. His grass was barely an inch longer than his neighbor's, but Karen had marked it as unacceptable. Sheldon, still fuming from the mailbox ordeal, decided to test her. He let the grass grow another week, and that's when he woke up to a yellow violation notice staked into his front yard. It was bold, loud, public, a neon-colored warning to the entire neighborhood that Sheldon Harris was out of compliance. That was the moment he realized Karen wasn't just enforcing rules, she was targeting him. Then came the garbage can fiasco. Sheldon always placed his garbage bins at the curb the night before trash pickup, just like everyone else. But one morning he stepped outside to find his cans missing. Confused, he walked up and down the street, searching. Then he saw it, a letter taped to his door. Your garbage cans were improperly stored and have been temporarily confiscated. A $75 retrieval fee is required to reclaim them. Sheldon felt his blood boil. She had actually taken his trash cans. That night, he sat on his porch staring at Karen's house, the friendly facade, the cookie baking, the barbecues. It had all been an act, a mirage to lull everyone into a false sense of security while she schemed her way into power. And now, she was ruling the neighborhood like a dictator, and she wasn't done yet. The next day, Sheldon came back home to his worst nightmare. The car in his driveway was gone, stolen, and Karen Victor was standing across the street, smiling. It was a regular Tuesday. Sheldon had parked the car in his own driveway, locked it, and headed off to work. It was routine. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place. But when he returned home that evening, something was terribly wrong. The driveway was empty, his car gone. His heart pounded in his chest, a cold wave of panic crashing over him. Stolen? He fumbled for his phone, his fingers trembling, already prepared to dial the police. But before he could, a sound, deliberate, condescending, cut through the silence. "Oh, you're back!" Karen's voice rang out, thick with smugness and unmistakable glee. Sheldon turned slowly, his jaw tightening, his fists clenching involuntarily. There she stood, Karen Victor, the self-appointed queen of Maplewood Springs, arms crossed, lips curled into a grin so satisfied it made his blood boil. "Karen," he said, forcing his voice to remain steady, but there was an edge to it, a warning. "Where is my car?" Karen let out an exaggerated sigh, shaking her head as if he were a misbehaving child. "Oh, Sheldon, don't be so dramatic. It was cluttering up the neighborhood, so I had it removed." For a second, Sheldon just stared at her, struggling to process what he had just heard. "Removed?" he echoed, his voice barely above a whisper. "You had my car towed?" Karen's grin widened. "Of course, it was an eyesore. This is a classy neighborhood, Sheldon. We can't have old, ugly junkers ruining the aesthetic." His nostrils flared, anger bubbling under the surface. "Karen, that car was parked in my driveway, on my property. You had no right—" She cut him off with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Oh, please. Your property still falls under the Homeowners Association, which means I make the rules. And honestly, you should be thanking me. That rust bucket was bringing down the property values." Sheldon's hands clenched into fists. His vision blurred slightly as rage burned through him. This wasn't just entitlement. This was absolute, calculated malice. "Karen," he said, his voice deathly calm, "do you have any idea what you've just done?" She rolled her eyes. "Oh, spare me the dramatics, Sheldon. It's a car. If it means that much to you, go pick it up from the impound lot like a normal person." Sheldon took a slow, measured breath, trying to keep his composure. "Karen, that car? It doesn't belong to me." Karen's smug smirk faltered for the briefest moment, but she quickly recovered. "So what? Does it belong to your little girlfriend?" She laughed, a high, cruel sound. "Oh, please tell me it belongs to some desperate loser like yourself who can't afford to live in a decent place." Sheldon's jaw clenched. "No, Karen, it belongs to my cousin." Karen scoffed. "Oh, wow, how scary. Am I supposed to be intimidated by your cousin? What, is she some broke mechanic or maybe a wannabe influencer?" She laughed again, her condescension practically dripping from her words. "Oh, let me guess, another nobody who lives paycheck to paycheck, dreaming of one day affording something nice? Maybe she should be thanking me for forcing her to get rid of that hunk of junk." Sheldon exhaled sharply, forcing himself to stay calm. "Karen, you don't know what you're talking about. You had no right to do this." She waved him off. "Oh, quit whining, Sheldon. If your cousin has such a problem, tell her to grow up and handle it like an adult instead of having you fight her battles. Honestly, the two of you are just pathetic. No wonder neither of you own anything worth keeping." Sheldon took another slow step forward, his voice dangerously quiet. "Karen, you have no idea who you just messed with." Karen rolled her eyes again, flipping her hair over her shoulder. "Oh, please don't stand there acting like this is some big deal. You and your cousin are just like the rest of the lowlifes who think they can sneak into a respectable neighborhood and lower its standards. I did this place a favor." Sheldon's fingers hovered over his phone, his stomach twisting with an anger he had never felt before. But instead of reacting, he simply smirked. "I guess we'll see how much of a favor you think you did. Soon enough." As Sheldon stepped into his house, his pulse was racing, his hands were clammy, his breath uneven. This wasn't just an inconvenience, this was an invasion. His property, his home, his right to exist peacefully had just been violated in the most arrogant way possible. He could still see Karen's smug face in his mind, sipping iced tea like she was the queen of the damn world. With shaky fingers, he punched in the number. The phone rang once, twice, then, "Sheldon, what's up?" The sound of his cousin's voice was a lifeline, but even so, the words nearly caught in his throat. His heart pounded as he swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the counter for support. "Sheila!" He exhaled, his voice tense, laced with disbelief. "Karen Victor had your car towed!" There was silence, a long, heavy silence, the kind that stretched so thin it felt like the calm before a Category 5 hurricane. "She did what?" Sheila's voice was sharp now, cutting through the static like a blade. The ice in her tone made Sheldon's skin prickle. "She called a private towing company, said it was violating neighborhood standards." He spat out the words, each syllable making his blood boil hotter. Another pause, then a slow, measured breath, the kind Sheila always took when she was shifting from casual cousin to stone-cold federal agent. "Where's the car now?" Her words were clipped, precise, like she was already building the case in her mind. Sheldon's fingers curled into a fist as he grabbed the slip Karen had so arrogantly taped to his door, like a trophy of her victory. He scanned the paper, forcing himself to focus through the red haze clouding his vision. "Company's called Apex Towing." "Got it. Stay put." The line went dead before he could even respond. He dropped the phone onto the counter, exhaling a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. His legs felt weak, but he wasn't going to sit. No, he was going to stand there fuming, ready to explode if Karen so much as blinked in his direction. Minutes stretched into eternity. He could still hear the sound of the tow truck in his mind, the mechanical clank of chains, the distant roar of an engine ripping something away from him. Then his phone rang. He snatched it up so fast it nearly slipped from his grasp. "Sheldon!" Sheila's voice came through, colder than ice, sharper than steel. "That's a government-issued vehicle." She didn't yell. She didn't need to. The weight of those words pressed down on his chest like a boulder. A lump formed in his throat. "Yeah," he said, his voice low. "I figured." "She took a government vehicle!" Sheila hissed, her breath heavy. "Do you understand what that means? Towing it without authorization? That's a federal offense, Sheldon. She's in deep, real deep." He could hear the controlled fury in her tone. She wasn't just mad. She was seething. He could picture her now, pacing back and forth in her office, fingers tightening into fists, teeth gritted so hard it hurt. She's about to have a really bad day. Sheldon didn't even try to suppress his grin. His grip on the phone relaxed, his heart pounding for an entirely different reason now. Karen Victor had made a mistake, a colossal one, and she had no idea what was coming for her. An hour later, the quiet hum of the neighborhood was shattered by the deep, rolling growl of two black SUVs pulling up to Sheldon's driveway. The vehicles gleamed under the afternoon sun, their tinted windows hiding the storm about to descend on Karen Victor. Karen, who had been watching Sheldon like a hawk, suddenly shifted in her seat on her porch. Her confident smirk faltered, her fingers tightening around the armrest of her chair. She had been the queen of this community for too long to think anything could ever shake her throne. But now, something in the air felt wrong. The doors of the SUVs swung open in unison. Two federal agents stepped out, their movements crisp and deliberate. The man in front, tall, with a chiseled jaw and the kind of presence that could command a courtroom, adjusted his badge on his belt. The woman beside him, slightly shorter, her dark hair tied into a severe bun, carried an intensity in her sharp gaze that could make even the most arrogant crumble. Sheldon's heart pounded in his chest. He had waited for this moment, the sweet, inevitable collapse of Karen's reign of terror. But even he hadn't expected the visceral thrill that ran through him as the agents walked straight toward her porch. Karen rose from her chair, smoothing down her blouse with hands that trembled slightly. She forced a smirk, the same one she had used to intimidate her neighbors. "Well, this is a surprise," she said, but her voice wobbled just enough to betray the fear beginning to coil in her stomach. The tall agent didn't miss a beat. Ma'am, we need to speak with you. Karen swallowed. What? This is ridiculous! The shrill edge in her voice made Sheldon bite back a laugh. For the first time, Karen wasn't the one calling the shots. The agent pulled out a notepad, his expression impassive. We have reports that you ordered a private company to remove a federally issued vehicle. Can you confirm this? Karen's breath hitched. Her eyes darted between Sheldon and the agents as if looking for an escape. I didn't know it was federal property. How was I supposed to know? The female agent took a step forward, her presence cold and authoritative. So you admit to removing a vehicle that wasn't yours, without verifying ownership? Karen's face drained of color. The blood rushed to her ears, making everything feel muffled. The world around her, once her kingdom, now felt like a trap closing in. I had every right. This is an HOA community, she tried, but even to herself the words sounded weak. The male agent exhaled as if dealing with this level of entitlement physically drained him. Ma'am, unauthorized removal of government property is a federal offense. Karen took a step back, her heel catching on the edge of the porch. Her entire body tensed as though she had just walked straight into an ambush. Wait, you're arresting me? The agent's cold smile sent a chill down her spine. We're detaining you for questioning. Whether charges are filed, well, that depends. Karen's throat went dry. She turned to Sheldon, her eyes wide, pleading, desperate. You can't let them do this. You know I didn't mean anything by it. Sheldon crossed his arms, feigning deep thought. You know, Karen, you made this entire neighborhood live in fear over parking violations and mailbox colors. Funny how now that you're facing real consequences, you suddenly want leniency. Karen's lip trembled. The fear in her eyes was no longer masked by bravado. It was raw, unfiltered terror. Sheldon, please! The female agent pulled out a pair of cuffs, the sound of metal clicking together, slicing through the silence of the street. Ma'am, turn around! Karen jerked back, her entire body shaking now. No, you don't understand. I'm the HOA president. Not anymore! A voice called out from a few houses down. One of the other homeowners, an elderly man who Karen had once fined for having a garden gnome, stood watching. A few other neighbors had gathered too, whispering amongst themselves. Some were wide-eyed with shock. Others, smirking. Karen whipped her head around, taking in the crowd. The realization hit her like a freight train. They weren't going to save her. She had ruled over this neighborhood with an iron fist, and now they were here to watch her fall. The agent stepped forward. Ma'am, last warning, turn around. Karen let out a strangled sob, her legs giving out as she sank onto the porch. You can't do this! This isn't fair! Sheldon took a slow sip of his coffee, savoring every moment. Fair? Karen, this is justice. And as the agents pulled her to her feet, handcuffing her and leading her toward the SUV, the first clap rang out, then another and another, until the entire street erupted in applause. Karen's downfall wasn't just fast, it was a spectacle. By the next morning, her name was everywhere. Local news stations ran the story on repeat, headlines plastered across the internet like wildfire. HOA president faces investigation for abuse of power. Her face, once smug and self-righteous, was now drained of all confidence, frozen in snapshots of shame as reporters dissected her every move. Turns out, this wasn't her first offense. She had left a trail of destruction in her previous neighborhood, buried under complaints of harassment, unjust fines, and borderline extortion. The difference? Back then, no one had fought back. This time, she had crossed the wrong person. The HOA, her own kingdom, her personal playground, turned on her in an instant. The very people who had once praised her for keeping the community in order were now the first to sharpen their knives. An emergency meeting was called, one she hadn't even been invited to. A room full of people who had once cheered for her, now whispering about her demise. It was poetic justice in its purest form. And then, the vote. Just like when she had taken power, unanimously, without hesitation, she was removed in the exact same way. Every hand in the room shot up. No debates, no second chances. The very bylaws she had once wielded against others were now the noose tightening around her neck. She wasn't just stripped of her title, she was exiled. The lawsuits followed swiftly, like vultures circling a fresh kill. A class action lawsuit was filed by homeowners who had suffered under her reign of terror, families who had been fined into financial ruin, elderly residents who had been bullied into silence, People who had been pushed to their limits by a woman who thrived on control. She tried to fight it. She hired lawyers, sent desperate emails, called in favors. But no one was coming to save her. She had built her power on fear, not loyalty. And fear fades the moment the throne crumbles. The day she left was unforgettable. Neighbors lined the street, not to help, but to watch, to witness the fall of a tyrant, to see justice served in its rawest, most satisfying form. She stormed out, boxes in hand, her face twisted in rage and humiliation, a lifetime of control slipping through her fingers like sand. She searched the crowd looking for sympathy, for outrage on her behalf. There was none. Then she spotted him, Sheldon, standing on his porch, a cup of coffee in his hand, calm, unbothered, the very image of satisfaction. Her voice shook with fury. "Are you happy now? You ruined my life." He took a slow sip of his coffee, letting the moment sink in, savoring it. Then finally he met her eyes and spoke the words that sealed her fate. "No, Karen, you did that all on your own." And just like that, Karen was gone. Moral of the story? Power-hungry HOA Karens always get what's coming to them. If you love this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more wild tales of entitled people getting exactly what they deserve.